this will be wonderful. It's our first live version of this. Liz has written a fantastic book. The origin of all of this was I was running a small nonprofit in the Bay Area and was struggling we're trying to work with schools to figure out what actually moves the needle in teaching and learning. And it was hard to find things that worked. And at the time, George Lucas Education Foundation, which is now Edutopia, came out with a website that was going to be a repository of all the things that work. And naively back then, I was like, oh, this is going to solve it. There are all these things that work. It's just that people don't know about it. And turns out, if you look at it now, there's very few things that have worked in scale in education. So this is my venture into trying to talk to people who are experts and smarter than me about this to see what works. And you'll hear in a minute, but the mix of COVID and the ESSER funds created a very unique opportunity. So we're going to start in a second. There's a lot of rich things here, and she's a true expert. And thank you, Liz, for joining.
Thanks for having me.
So welcome to the Education Equation. We're trying something new here. We're live in New York City, just off Broadway, and we have a live crowd. So we will hear from the crowd now. That was awesome. Thank you all. So our guest today is Liz Cohn. She has worked as an analyst and advisor for foundations, districts, and nonprofit organizations in the K-12 education space for nearly 2 decades. She began her career at the District of Columbia Public Schools, Office of Data and Accountability, and then at the Office of the State Superintendent in D.C. She's worked at FutureEd, the Institute for Children, Poverty, and Homelessness, the Urban Institute, and Whiteboard Advisors, as well as being a Strategic Data Fellow at Harvard University Center for Education Policy and Research. She is now Vice President of Policy at 50CAN, a nonprofit network of local leaders advocating for high-quality education for all students. And most recently, and I think most importantly, why we're here today, is she published a book, The Future of Tutoring, which is an insightful, data-filled book that takes a sharp, research-based look at the many models of tutoring and their impact. Liz, welcome to the Education Equation.
Thank you.
So I started the podcast to identify what actually works in education. And as a researcher, you've been asking that same question for much of your career. In this book, you argue convincingly that tutoring is one of the very few examples that have clearly improved educational outcomes. Our goal today is going to dig deep into tutoring, not just the evidence, but also unpacking tutoring, all the aspects of it, because it's such a broad and sometimes misunderstood category. But I want to start by acknowledging that educational research is really hard, and it's next to impossible to prove anything definitively. So thank you for dedicating your career to this field. And one of the constant challenges I hear from researchers is it's very hard to find enough data that you can use. So we're in that world, COVID hits, and in your book, you call it an accidental experiment. So tell us why COVID was such a uniquely rich moment from an educational research standpoint, and what made it the perfect storm for researching on tutoring.
Sure. Well, we were, I think, all of us there in 2020, and everyone started scratching our heads collectively, especially in K-12 education in that summer, as it became clear that in many parts of the country, schools were not going to reopen. We were already scratching our heads about what we were going to do about the loss of the last part of the 1920 school year. And it was just this really remarkable thing where there was sort of these whispers that just sort of started in a variety of places of maybe tutoring. Like we should probably think about tutoring. Tutoring is been around for a very long time, since Aristotle. Somebody joked that maybe the name of this book should be Tutoring, the Second Oldest Profession.
Would have been that punchier title. Yeah.
But, tutoring is inherently personal. And one thing that happened during COVID is that almost every child and every family had a slightly different experience and was going to come back to the classroom with slightly different needs. So it made a lot of sense that this was sort of the response. So we started having these conversations, people saying, okay, we think we're going to do tutoring. What's that going to look like? This is now fall 2020. And then the beginning of 21, at the start of the Biden administration, and President Biden announces $129 billion for K-12 education, on top of many billions that had already been given in the fall in the first couple rounds of federal funding. But in this last big pot, he said, you got to use 20% of these funds to address learning loss in some way. And I don't know how many of the folks here are in K-12, but having worked at both the district and state level, nobody is set up to handle that amount of money pretty well. And so people were like, we got nothing to do. It was a ripe environment for someone to say, here's a thing to do. And so just the field, I think, really coalesced around this idea. There were a few researchers that really said, we're going to start providing evidence really rapidly. I think it's a really important part of the story is that it wasn't just that schools started saying, let's work with tutoring providers. It was that researchers said, we're going to create ongoing feedback loops of data and information as you're doing this. I mean, there have been dozens of white papers, case studies published by very established researchers in the last few years, specifically on tutoring. And so all of these things kind of work together to create this moment that we were just off to the races. And this became the primary response. By May 2023, 80% of school districts reported to the U.S. Department of Education they were offering some kind of tutoring program. And about 2/3 of those were offering what we'll call high impact tutoring or high dosage tutoring, which is mostly what the book is about.
So you mentioned tutoring, sort of the second oldest profession, which I love. I'd love to hear a little more of a brief history of how tutoring has intersected with education or been embedded in education. And including in the 2001 No Child Left Behind Act.
We'll start a little bit farther back. If you go back to the 19th century, even before the College Board existed, there was a lot of tutoring that was primarily how mostly affluent white boys were prepared to go to university. And then in the late 19th century, this is a brief history lesson, I promise, but as progressive education reformers started thinking, should we democratize access to education in this country? And you can look back and folks like Horace Mann and John Dewey started saying, we got to get away from this tutoring nonsense because we can never do it at scale. And so we really turned away from tutoring as a practice, and that worked out pretty well for us for a while. And then, of course, in the last 70 years, let's say, we've been on a bit of a bumpier road, I think, for public education. And one thing that's happened in that time, even before 2001, is the ongoing rise of private tutoring. So if you talk to families with means, they are routinely hiring all sorts of tutors for their kids all of the time. In 2001, with the passage of the No Child Left Behind Act, schools that failed to make adequate yearly progress, and those words bring back feelings for people who worked on this during that time.
Can be true.
I used to have to calculate adequate yearly progress for DC schools. That was my job. So this was a big thing for me. But one of the things they were required to do was to offer supplemental education services, which is essentially the opportunity for people to have after-school tutoring. But it totally bombed because there was no infrastructure. There was no additional funding set aside from this. And we really didn't have actually very little evidence base of how to do this well and what it might look like. And so that effort, 24 years ago now, really didn't get us very far with tutoring. I think it actually made people sort of turn away. See, we sort of tried it. It didn't work.
Yeah.
Because the crazy thing, honestly, is that if you look back not that far before COVID, in 2014, 2015, Roland Fryer is a Harvard economist. So Roland had a lot of the same questions that you do about what works in education. So he went to Houston and he said, we're going to try this thing. Let's test a bunch of stuff in Houston schools. All of the big interventions, small class sizes, things around teacher training, things around this, that, and tutoring. And in 2015, published results where tutoring blew everything else out of the water. And nobody was talking. I never knew about that story. And this is what I do. I was working at that time. So, we've been on a bumpy road. And then we got to COVID and we also invented this new thing because we had this new evidence base called high impact tutoring. And then did it.
No, it's great. And I agree. There's pretty good research prior to your book, but it didn't pick up or didn't stick. And we're both NBA fans, and we talk about the fact that, for a long time, the three-pointer was underutilized in the NBA. And it took a while to realize, hey, a three-pointer is more valuable than a two-pointer. And now the whole game has changed. Maybe tutoring's at that stage.
Some people don't like it when the game has changed. And they feel that play is different.
Michael Jordan was saying that it was better back in his day.
Michael Jordan still thinks he can beat everyone if he got on the court right now.
Yeah, I would bet against him. So impact, most importantly, obviously this is what this pod focuses on. How are schools, how are districts, how are states measuring success of tutoring?
So look, when you have an accidental experiment like 10,000 school districts doing versions of the same thing at the same time, you're not going to have consistent measurement. It really depends is the answer. So like big district initiatives where the district's really trying to scale this in places like Baltimore, Ector County, Texas, a handful of other places, they're mostly looking at their annual assessment where they're looking at NWA map, fall, spring. But you get a lot of early literacy programs, especially if you're working K-1 early literacy. Well, you're not taking tests, right? So they're looking at often using DIBELS data,
Yeah.
right, which is an
Yeah,
early
yeah.
literacy assessment and things like that. There's a lot of data across the board. I mean, I've also been in schools where they just made up their own pre-post test. We're going to do tutoring for 10 weeks, and these are the skills that we know fifth graders are missing. So the math, interventionist made up a test, and they gave that pre-post.
For us in the college world, that's frightening, but go, keep going.
I think when you're talking about like 14 kids in a pilot tutoring, I will embrace it from the perspective of I want folks to be looking at data that feels meaningful and actionable for them. Right now, we are trying to have a few sort of formal RCTs, randomized controlled trials, sort of come out of this newer versions of tutoring. But again, they're using an array of measures because it depends what it is that you're tutoring. A lot of tutoring has been early literacy. The tutoring movement also aligned with the science of reading movement, and that has been a particular focus. So they needed to think about other measures there because we don't have state assessments.
Yeah, we'll get into it later, likely, and I don't want to jump in now, but you argue very convincingly that part of success is even just the adults involved and the students involved believing in the impact. Give us a couple examples of success with data and of the many things. You looked at a lot of examples. So
yeah,
can you give us a couple?
Yeah. I mean, actually, I'm going to give you some new stuff that's not even in the book because this is an ongoing, evolving field. So
breaking news.
Yeah. So in the District of Columbia, both in DCPS and charter schools in DC. So last year in the 24-25 school year, they tutored about 9,000 kids. And they're just releasing data now that shows that those kids got about 3 additional months of, this is math tutoring, of math. And what's great about that isn't just that these kids are getting more math. It's that in the previous year, the kids who did math tutoring got 2 additional months of math. And that's a whole additional month through implementation, through really thinking about, tutor school match, who's the right partner for each school, and really paying attention to a lot of the details that I know we're going to talk about. So it's not just that these kids are really getting meaningful additional academic support. It's that the district is figuring out how to increase the amount that they're getting from the tutoring programs.
That's awesome. And the results of that as far as performance or achievement?
Yeah. So overall, I mean, if you look on state assessments, DC is on the rise. So they're feeling good. I mean, DC, if you talk to DC right now, they'll say they're going to be the first urban district to close the achievement gap in math. And they believe that tutoring is the lever they're pulling to get them there. So that's pretty exciting.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
But there's lots of other stories like that, too, at the district and school level. I mean, in Guilford County, North Carolina, which is the Greensboro area. And they've done tutoring across grades, but they've, really seen that their students are growing more. So North Carolina, like a lot of states, North Carolina looks both at overall achievement, but also growth. And they're seeing that their students who are in tutoring programs are achieving significantly higher growth levels than students who aren't in the tutoring, and also other districts in North Carolina that didn't take the big approach. Guilford's one of the districts that really scaled the most. They got up to about 17,000 kids in high impact tutoring at the height in 23-24.
Yeah. And the book has many, many, many great examples of success. And interestingly, with a lot of different approaches that we'll get into. So it wasn't like there's not a magical one size fits all. You just mentioned high impact tutoring. So let's define it for the listeners.
Okay. So we invented this new thing and gave it a name. I didn't invent it. Some other people gave it names and used evidence. So this is what it is. It's at least 3 times a week for at least 30 minutes. No more than 4 students to an adult is the ideal ratio. And a consistent adult, right? So that it's every time you're the tutor, not that there's a rotation of tutors. And that ideally the material that is being covered in tutoring is pretty closely aligned with what the student is learning in class. And I say ideally because I think this is the piece some tutoring folks feel really strongly that it has to be aligned. I think there's some flexibility, particularly in younger grades, where you can have alignment, but different curricula for tutoring and...
Right. So we'll get into the alignment. I also think some people say the materials only should be whether high quality instructional materials, or but some version of that is sometimes I say, yeah. So we're going to try something new. We're calling it the Truthometer. And this could fail miserably, but we're going to try it. We're going to talk about a lot of aspects of tutoring. And we have a thermometer that has 5, which is the best. And the data is it's hot and it's proven. 4 is it's warm, but could benefit from more data. 3 is moderate with mixed results. 2 is cold and no evidence. And 1 is freezing, and actually there's evidence on the contrary to this thing. So we're going to use that scale. We're going to try this.
We're gonna do it.
Doing it live right off Broadway.
We love truth.
Okay. So when we talk about tutoring, I'm going to go through a bunch of different variables. So what does the data say on the difference between one-on-one versus one to small group kind of situation?
I mean, I will go 5 in that I think there's clear data that one-on-one is going to get you better results than
1-on-4,
than 1-on-4. Actually, there's just literally a news study that came out on this in the last few weeks showing that the time on task in the tutoring session is higher for one-on-one versus two-on-one. Two-on-one also, the tutor ends up spending more time talking than the students. One thing we spend a lot of time looking at is sort of the tutor talk ratio, because we want to make sure the students are actually doing the engagement. But I will say that 5, the caveat is it's more expensive to do one-on-one.
Right.
So when we talk, I know we're going to talk about cost, but
Yeah, that's going to be the bottom line. A lot of this, maybe the best is just not affordable. But let's say then, to that spirit, that it is a small group. It's 3 or 4 students to tutor. Is there a difference between 2, 3, 4? Is there any data that supports that?
I think it's a 3 because I think you can. I'm not sure there's explicit data. I think it's easy to extrapolate from existing evidence that fewer is going to be better.
Right. Yeah, great. So then there's virtual tutors versus in person.
We'll go with 5 because we have great evidence that it doesn't matter.
You're hearing some surprises in the room. Huh?
This is like one of my favorite facts about tutoring because, of course, right, again, coming out of 2020 and the disaster of what I now like to call emergency remote learning to distinguish from, I think, real virtual learning and virtual tutoring now. And I just want to say I have 3 kids in school, so I also did this as a parent. It was bad. It did not work. The truth on the Truthometer is that we have studies now that show that virtual tutoring, you can get the same effects. I actually did a study right here in New York City. The tutors were from CUNY. It was an early reading program, and they looked at a variety of things, including whether it was virtual or in person and other characteristics of the college student tutor. The modality did not make any difference. And I think this is tremendously important. And I have watched this myself. So for the book, I visited 19 schools in 7 states and DC. I did a lot of other interviews too. But I've seen this virtual tutoring happening, and I think that it's clear, and anyone who works with kids or has kids, kids are very comfortable with technology. They are comfortable creating a relationship with someone over a screen. This actually feels more normal to them than it probably does to us. And they create real relationships with their tutors. They are excited to participate in their tutoring sessions, and the whole thing really works. And it opens a lot of doors to who can tutor, access, all of that.
So I always imagine virtual of student in front of their laptop or their iPad with a tutor, but there's more to it. Like, describe some of the virtual tutoring environments you saw.
There's a few ways to do it. I have sat in a cafeteria where there's groups of 3 kids, but they're actually totally different spots in the cafeteria, but they're all logged into the same Zoom call with a tutor, which if you've ever tried to manage large groups of kids, sometimes you might want to like that. I've seen it where you have more than one kid sitting in front of the same screen with a virtual tutor on the other screen. I've seen a lot of iterations of it, but for the most part, it's not that different really from, all of us being on a Zoom call.
Right. And one thing that you described in your book was sometimes there's someone in the classroom, the teacher, someone walking around. Describe how that can work.
That part's important. Again, if you know anything about classroom management, is you want an adult wherever the kids are. And usually this is the classroom teacher. So Teach for America launched a tutoring program called TFA Ignite, which is really taken off beyond even TFA's expectations. It started in Arizona because the TFA executive director in Arizona was talking to schools in her area in 2020 and said, "What do you need?" They said, "We think we're going to need some tutors. Could you help us?" And she was like, "I'll try to work on this." And now she runs a national tutoring program. But what their model is, they actually pay the classroom teacher a stipend to not only oversee the kids during tutoring, but to provide some light touch oversight and management to the college tutors themselves, checking in with them, making sure they have the materials. That particular program uses whatever curricular materials the school has, so the teacher becomes a conduit, but they pay the teacher maybe, I think it's like $2,000 over the 10 weeks that they're running the tutoring program every day. So that is a big
And that helps keep time on task and things like that. Real quick, anything with data on showing certain ages or academic subjects that are more proven to work with tutoring than not?
I don't know exactly what angle I take on this. I guess I would say 5, that it's hot and proven that tutoring works at all ages. That's the beauty. It's endlessly flexible, and we can make it work for everyone.
And any math for reading and writing, is there
Not in terms of potential effect size. We see big effects on all sorts of subjects, both reading and math, we have a lot of evidence for, and with paid tutors and volunteer tutors and all sorts of different kinds of things like that. There's other usually implementation factors that make it more or less, which is mostly, right? Like so some people call high impact tutoring, high dosage tutoring. And it's true that the dosage is actually like really important. So if you're not getting kids to enough sessions, they're not going to get the effect. And it often gets harder to get them to the sessions as they get older.
Yeah. But this is good news, I think, for our listeners, because it means independent of the academic subject, independent of the age, it can work.
Yeah.
You got into this a little bit, and we have people in this room and listeners who are responsible for the school master schedule. And I think one of the things that came out was it's optimal to be embedded in the school day, not as a weekend or after school thing. You just get better performance, and it needs to be done sort of strategically. Can you share some models you saw where it was done really well and embedded in the school?
Yes. But before I do that, I want to just sort of take one step back to make a big picture point, which is that one of the reasons that I wrote this whole book about tutoring isn't just because I care about tutoring. It's because one of the ongoing critiques, I think, of public education is that it's really hard to make change, that we don't do a good job of embracing innovation, and that there are all these immovable pieces of the system. And one of the things that I think is truly inspiring and incredible about the work that's happened around tutoring is that schools and districts have been willing to make those big changes that nobody thinks that we can. And one of those things is around scheduling, and others are on staffing and all sorts of other things. But on the scheduling, and I think that this is a story, I want people to know that we can do big, hard things, and I want us to know that we can do big, hard things.
That's a great thing, yeah.
So among the big, hard things, right? So elementary schools is the easiest, and a lot of this tutoring has been in elementary schools. And the best way to do it is that you build an intervention block, which some schools already have, and that becomes sort of the dedicated tutoring time. And everyone during that block, either the whole grade or sometimes the whole school, is either in tutoring or some other sort of small group activity. I have seen schools where everyone is doing tutoring. I have seen schools where, because of resource constraints, some kids are doing tutoring, a small group is working with the teacher, maybe a small group is doing some acceleration work through some ed tech program or something like that. There's different ways to kind of slice and dice, but that's the primary way to do it, is just really create a dedicated time in the day and shift the whole schedule around that.
That's a great takeaway. That's an important piece. Another key piece is alignment, and we've talked about it a little bit. The tutoring is aligned to the curriculum, to instructional materials, to assessments. Again, give us an example of a best practice where that, everyone will say, duh, right, to that, but give us a good example where that you saw that really working.
So again, I want to say, with all things, tutoring is a tool that you want to use in service of a strategy. And so if you just do tutoring because you heard it's really great, it's probably not going to get you as far as if you are very clear on our goal for, just to use DC again, our goal is to close the achievement gap. We're going to use tutoring as a tool to do that. So we're going to develop, what they've done in DC is they actually developed their own math tutoring curriculum to address knowing their own standards and where they see, based on test score data and other pieces, like what kids really need support with. And then they're using that curriculum to do it. So that is one way to do it.
Most direct problem.
Yeah. And another way to do it, again, with the early literacy, there's a variety of ways to measure kind of how kids are doing in early literacy. And especially, I think, in states, for instance, that now have third grade retention laws, there's a lot of emphasis in second and third grade on making sure that kids are going to be able to pass third grade and go on to fourth grade. So how you align the tutoring to the kind of literacy skills they're going to need for the test then kind of gets you where you want to go, because your goal is to keep kids moving on when they're actually prepared to do so. And then you use tutoring as your lever to do that.
Got it. That's great. So embedding, alignment. Another key thing is the reception by the school, the teachers, the whole program. And I have a 24-year-old daughter who got her master's in social work, and she had 2 practicums, both in schools. And in one practicum, she would go to the school, and they really sort of treated her like an outsider, and she didn't have a great experience. And then the other one, she loved it. They treated her like a peer, and they were glad to have her, and she was involved with middle school students. And that inspired her, really. And she's now in education, So it's obvious that we want these tutors to be received whether virtual or in person by the teachers. How do you set that up? If you're a superintendent, you're a principal, you're an instructional leader, how do you get the teachers on board and they don't see this as a competing factor or something different, particularly when they're outside tutors who may not have the same credentials as the teachers?
Look, every school building is an organization. It has its own organizational culture, and you got to figure out how to navigate it. But another kind of wild part of the story for me is just that tutoring is very popular, and it's very popular with teachers. And then usually that's because, at least in the places I've been, the teachers, there's 2 things. One is, okay, so we had COVID, schools shut down, kids came back. the spectrum of needs in every classroom pretty much in America got wider, and the spectrum of behavioral issues and all this stuff, right? So if you take that, and we know, right, you can look at all sorts of teacher survey data. It's tough out there right now. Teacher satisfaction is low and all these pieces. And you say, okay, we're going to bring in this thing that is going to explicitly address the things you're saying are going to make your job harder. And we're going to do it in a way that we hope is going to make the rest of your job also easier. It turns out people like that. That's one part of it. But I also think there's ways to create opportunities for both school and teacher kind of ownership. I think in Ector County in West Texas, they did a really nice job with this in a few different ways. One is that at the district level, so when then Superintendent Scott Murray said, okay, we're going to do this big tutoring initiative. And they put out an RFP, got vendors, they got it down to 5 vendors, and they invited every principal in the district to, if they wanted to attend, FAQ interview call with the vendors. And then they were able to sort of rank order their preference. Ultimately, they chose 2 vendors. And then the district said, if you're participating in the tutoring program, you can pick which of these 2 vendors. So principals were sort of brought along for the process and had a voice in it. And then with the vendors, there was also optionality that both the principal could choose how they wanted their teachers to interact, but teachers ultimately were allowed to choose, do you want to send materials directly to the tutor, or do you want the tutor to use these materials that we've already created aligned with, in this case, Texas state standards? About a quarter of the teachers in Ector County opted to send their own materials. The other 3/4 didn't. But it's things like this that just showed, I think it helped teachers feel, okay, they're taking this seriously. They're treating me as a professional. It's going to be an add-on for me. And then they paid a lot of attention to implementation.
Yeah.
And then the teachers really liked it.
That's great. We talked about some of the challenges. You mentioned probably the biggest challenge is expense, right? There's no question that you could have 1-to-1 versus 1-to-25 for every student. The outcomes would be better. And you mentioned private tutors, hundreds of dollars per hour. So ESSER funding came in with massive amount of money, sort of paused that challenge for a bit. Now ESSER funding is done. So as you think of it, like, when something's expensive but effective, there's different ways to approach this. One would be figure out ways to reduce the cost. And then there's a federal work study where you can get people in college who are getting paid to do this. Although that sounds like there's less of that. You could use AmeriCorps. You could use sort of less expensive tutors. You could potentially use technology. We'll get into AI. You could also more hyper-focus on fewer students. So like if you think of all the factors and you were advising a superintendent or someone who's trying to implementing a program that they can afford to do for a long period of time, which of those elements would you tell them to focus on and how would you navigate that?
Well, there's a reason I'm not a superintendent. I don't want to make these choices. But again, to take a step back, we spend a lot of money on a lot of programs in education, a lot of interventional programs, a lot of, all these MTSS and RTI and all these different pieces that we already do. And a lot of those programs, in some places they may work, and in a lot of cases they don't work, or we don't have great evidence. So one thing I would say, again, is like, what's your big picture plan? Where are you trying to go? And what are the tools that you have evidence for? I don't think everyone should do tutoring, again, to do tutoring. I think that if you're looking for an evidence-based tool, you don't feel like you have one, this is a great one. So there's that piece of it. All of these things are true. There's how's the field trying to make tutoring more efficient? So right now it's like usually something like $1,200 to $1,400 a kid over a year to get this kind of high impact tutoring. Now there are folks actively piloting right now some programs where the tutoring goes down to 2 days a week. The other days are a adaptive computer assisted program. There was a study on this pre-COVID with Algebra 1 tutoring that actually got the same results, got about a year's worth of additional math with a 4-day-a-week in-person tutoring. And then when they replaced half the tutoring with computer adaptive, they actually got the same result. And now there's right now piloting the same approach, but with an early literacy tutoring. And it's not done yet, but I was talking to the person, they said the data look really positive. So if we crack that code, it's going to drop the cost. So how is the field making it more efficient? And then look, I know this isn't how budgeting actually works, but I guess my thing on this is it doesn't serve kids if we pass them on from grade to grade without the requisite skills. This is as true for reading as it is for math. This isn't about blame, but it's really about, we need to probably think differently about how we allocate funds, because if we're stuck in second grade with kids who can't read and aren't mastering basic facts, and then you end up at one middle school that I've been spending time with in DC, and I visited for the book and I've gone back a few times. I mean, this year, that principal, almost every single sixth grader this is like the lowest income middle school in DC, every single sixth grader came in at a third grade level or lower in reading and math. She literally spent the first 3 weeks of the year taking her teachers to high-performing elementary schools to learn how to teach elementary skills.
Wow.
No middle school principal should be doing that. So that's where we need a system-wide approach of like, we got to think differently about this.
Yeah.
The other piece I would say is I wrote a whole chapter about contracts because that's sexy and cool.
I even read that chapter just for the record.
Thank you. But there has been a lot of innovation with using outcomes-based or performance-based contracts in tutoring, which allows the district to retain some amount of the money if you don't get the results that you're hoping for. And I think that's a really important tool that I would encourage superintendents and other leaders to leverage.
Yeah,
it
it's great.
requires more
Put the
work.
money where your mouth is.
Yeah, it requires more work for sure on the front side. But if you don't get where you want to go and you're left with $100,000 that you can use for something else, like maybe that upfront work is worth it.
Yeah. I have a friend who's a tutor and he wanted to do that. He's had such great results, but he said he'd start talking to families and said, I'll do it on a, performance basis. And they thought it was weird and it is like, thought there was something bad about it. But I think that is a great way to do it. There's definitely something, with healthcare, there's been all the research of like healthy eating and certain interventions early shave massive amounts later before someone gets ill and so forth. So I really do like your idea of, is there a way to do the equivalent of by not getting to the grade level, by not imparting the success early, we're digging ourselves beside a bigger hole, which then either at the federal or state level, maybe we figure out a way to fund it. But
there's a lot of kids who get, for instance, in late elementary, early middle, there are kids who get diagnosed with disabilities and end up with an IEP. Some of them have real disabilities and some of them were never taught. And we don't do a good job of distinguishing between that. And of course, all kids should get the services they need. But also, if we did a better job at the early years, I think that there could be huge savings recouped. If you
100%.
look at special ed like spending, when a lot of times we're actually just finally trying. It's really different, though, to teach a 7th grader who we never taught to read or do math effectively in the early grades, then they're going to end up with a whole host of other issues. I'd rather us focus on really nailing the early stuff and then kind of see how I think that could really yield some savings.
Yeah,
over
I'd
time.
love to work with you and make that case. So we mentioned sort of on the side AI, and that is really promising. The study you mentioned, where part of it is done not by a live tutor. So you started writing this book and really AI wasn't a big factor. Now the world's changed dramatically in a short amount of time. But what do you think, early on, and obviously anyone making predictions is tough in this space, but what do you see AI doing that can go better than humans can do? Or is there anything right now?
Okay, better is relative. I was on the train this morning coming up to Off-Broadway from DC. But anyways, and I was talking to the guy next to me and he was asking me also he said, well, can't we get AI to do this better? Because it seems like we're going to have these great avatars and kids won't even know that they're not talking to a human. And I actually do think that's possible. And I'm going to answer your question more fully. I'll just say that my answer to him, or my response was, I don't know if we want that. I do like to retain some humanity in the humanity part. But I do think that AI is going to do a lot in tutoring specifically. First of all, because of the success we're having in virtual tutoring, there are a lot of really impactful tools currently being built and piloted that are essentially AI tutor coaches. And as someone who right now, like my bias on this is that I'm pro-human tutoring at the moment. I love the idea of how we use AI to help tutors be better tutors while they get to maintain that human relationship.
Yeah.
And there was a small study done. It was actually done on a chat-based tutoring platform that went out of business, but the study remains and the data are true, which is that the folks at Stanford built an AI tutor coach, used it with this tutoring program. It essentially took out the entire learning curve of being a first-year tutor, because it would prompt the tutor to say, okay, the student gave this answer. Here are 2 questions you could ask to help them understand, right? Think about all the things, I don't know if folks, here, if you, Jeremy, have spent time in the classroom, but like there's all these questions that can help students get there themselves versus, and all of that. So I think I'm really excited about that. There's some really great work being done on that right now. I do think it's not hard to think that in the next 5 years, we're going to have some pretty great real AI tutor options. I've been talking about it as sort of an opportunity for tutoring differentiation. I can pretty easily envision a world in which there's a pretty low cost AI tutor that you could give every kid in your class. And for some number of those kids, it'll be enough to help them have that individual time, even just to bring up early literacy again. One thing we know is that kids need more time practicing reading. And there's some evidence that this is why maybe we don't do a great job with early reading, because in our current classroom structure, it's hard for kids to get the practice that they need.
Right.
If you can put them on with an AI program who can help them practice, correct them correctly, all of these pieces, that's pretty great. It's going to help some number of kids. And there will be some number of kids who need a human hand, virtual or otherwise, to hold and walk them through. And so that's kind of how I'm thinking about it.
No, it's great. I'm super bullish about this, actually. Not necessarily of zero human, but if technology can help better train tutors and then provide some of the supports to students so that the tutor time is even more focused. And we're seeing this with teaching today, like some of the tasks that teachers had to do, preparing lessons plan, grading. If technology can help them do that effectively or more efficiently, that gives more time for instruction relating to the student, which is great.
Yeah.
So in the intro of your book, and we've gone through this, you mentioned a large-scale intervention that has had success. This is not because she's here at College Board. That's not a paid advertisement. But you mentioned advanced placement.
Sure.
And we have researchers in the room on our advanced placement team, no pressure here. But you had some experience at DC schools with AP. So tell us, your story and view on the AP.
So the number one question in general I get asked in the education field about tutoring is, can we scale? This has been the sort of a debate from the very beginning in 2020 of people saying it's nice, everyone wants to do tutoring, we'll never be able to scale. So in talking with folks about, like, is there anything that we have scaled? The one answer is AP. And I think that it's indisputable that the AP program has successfully scaled across the country, although I think there are still high schools that don't have maybe all the same access, and virtual also has been a big part of this.
Yep.
I was just looking up in my own district that, our school offers these classes, but there's other ones you can do that are approved online and all these different pieces. So I think AP has scaled remarkably well, and I think there's a lot that tutoring can learn from that. And I think that when you look at AP now, and the fact that you have all these researchers in the room and all these people who work on it, the lesson for me, at least, is that implementation never ends. And that while AP has created a lot of opportunities for kids to have access to a standardized, rigorous high school course experience that they wouldn't have otherwise, there's also kids who end up in AP courses who are totally unprepared. You can see that, at DC, we used to publish all these data, and you could see there are schools where, like, no kids were getting above a 2 on an AP exam. And so then you just have to ask the question, like, well, what's happening there, right? Is it that the kids are coming in unprepared? Is it that the teacher, isn't getting through all the material because of, say, chronic absenteeism or behavioral issues in the classroom? Like, I don't think it's a flaw in the AP design. I think it's real world implementation never, ever stops being hard.
Yeah.
And so I think there's lessons also for if tutoring wants to hold up AP, and I think they should. I think there are lessons to be learned from where AP still has room to grow, that tutoring can think about, like, how do we continue to grow and expand, and hope that every student who experiences tutoring in the way I think that folks hope that every student who experiences AP gets the same experience, even if we have some data that say maybe it doesn't.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think one of the benefits of AP, another benefit, is that we have a standardized exam at the end.
Right.
And so then we can see where, students aren't achieving at the same level. I would argue it's more of a fundamental inequity of the system result, but then we can try to figure out, is it an implementation issue? How do we get students so they're more ready when they enter that AP class to be successful, so forth.
Right.
So we are almost out of time. So I'm going to ask you, I always ask a series of rapid fire questions to my guests. The first is, what's the one education buzzword you wish we could retire?
Equity.
Equity. Okay. What's your favorite book on education? And you can't say your own, which I would say, but.
It's The End of Education, which was written in 1995 by Neil Postman.
All right. I have not read that.
It's great.
It's the first one on this series I've not read. Name one thing that makes you bullish for future learners.
Humanity will always invent something new. Humanity is awesome.
All right. And what one class you wish all students had to take? And that could be high school, college.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this here, but I went to an IB high school, and I would say it's this class I had to take called The Theory of Knowledge. And I still, to this day, think about some of these big philosophical questions, like, if I picture a tree in my head and you picture a tree in your head, are we talking about the same tree? And what is the point of language? And these, like, really big things. And I spent a whole year in this class having to grapple with big philosophical issues. And I still think about it now, 30 years later.
Wow. That's awesome. I have not heard of that. So thank you. Before we engage our live audience, the last question I have for you is, if you could wave a magic wand and make one insight from your book shape education policy, what would it be?
we can follow the evidence and give kids what they need and believe that our system can be different than it is.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for those inspiring words. So thank you. Thanks for writing this wonderful book. And now it's the audience turn to get in. I'll ask you, raise your hand, we'll give you a mic, and then please introduce yourself and ask your question to Liz.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Redan from Homewood Flossmoor High School. It's a south suburb of Chicago. And as I was listening to you talk, do the majority of schools who use high impact tutoring programs use college students with these, or do they use teachers?
There's a lot of diversity and there's not a consistent approach. So there's a lot of work using college students because there's a lot of college students out there. In the last 5 years, I would say almost any kind of person you can think of has worked as a tutor in one of these tutoring programs. And that includes current teachers, retired teachers, stay-at-home moms, general retirees, college students, high school students, recent college grads, volunteer people who are just full-time professionals. All of those people have worked in these programs.
And I think your book does a great job of, one is near peer. There's some arguments for that, but there's also like college students, you can potentially get federal work studies so they can get paid through that. So it makes it more affordable. AmeriCorps, TFA, there's a lot of angles to find people and not pay them quite what you'd have to pay.
One place where we often see teachers, it's hard to use teachers if you're trying to do it in the school day. There's some models that have done it. One thing I am more bullish on, I was going to say this earlier, but I forgot. I am more bullish on now than actually when I was writing the book is on the promise of after-school tutoring. And I'm really excited about this. I think that we are really seeing some progress in figuring out how to use that after-school time. The biggest issue is usually that it's hard to get kids there or it's hard to get them to commit. But I don't know whether it's because parents are starting to be open to the idea of wanting their kids in these kinds of tutoring programs, but there's some really exciting work happening in the after-school space. Some of that uses teachers. In Louisiana, they offer actually a tutoring voucher in Louisiana for $1,500 for kids who are performing below grade level can apply for this. And the biggest provider uses teachers. They never tutor their own students. They get assigned other students from their school, but they get to build on the kind of teacher-family relationship that already exists, and they're having a lot of success with that model.
Yeah, that's great. Other questions?
Hi, my name is Clinton Alexander. I'm from Homewood Flossmoor High School. We're in the south suburbs of Chicago. And I wanted to ask you, when doing the research of high impact tutoring, what were the variables that caused the most impact? Because if you did the research on a site that didn't have a viable curriculum that was guaranteed, the alignment wouldn't really align. And so what was the biggest variable that you noticed the greatest impact within the high impact tutoring?
So the cluster of pieces that make up the core definition, which is that you actually get at least 90 minutes a week with a consistent adult in that same small group. Those are the things that together you really have to have. There's some fungibility and flexibility on all the other pieces. You got to get them the time with the dedicated adult, and then you're much more likely to get where you need to go.
Great. We need someone not from the suburbs of Chicago to ask a question.
David Ryan, superintendent in the southwest of New Hampshire. You had me at contracts. I'm really interested in, did you run across in your evidence any of the liabilities that may exist in terms of a malpractice situation where tutors run afoul or the achievement isn't there, or where students actually perform less?
I don't think I saw much where students performed less. I mean, the liability, all that stuff is everyone's getting a background check. All those pieces are sort of still in place in terms of typical liability protection. The biggest piece that's really different around the outcome space is that it requires the district or school and the vendor to agree this is how much progress we think we can make. So it's usually set up as a tiered. You get some portion as a base payment, right? And I literally walk through real examples in the book, but let's say it's $700 or something, usually base payment. You're going to get that no matter what. Then you can set it up in a few ways. You could have a proficiency and a growth. You could have this amount of proficiency or an extra amount of proficiency. And so that if the student hits those benchmarks that are agreed upon in the contract on assessments that the district gives, then the tutor gets paid more. And the district side of things is that the district has to guarantee the kid shows up for a minimum number of sessions. So the district has skin in the game too, because there's the base payment, and there can sometimes be things around if your kids aren't showing up. But there's an entire group now called the Outcomes-Based Contracting Group at the Southern Education Foundation, although they actually work nationally now, advising districts on how to set up these contracts. I think they're really impactful and really invite us to think differently about how we spend money in education.
Yeah, and I think the virtual tutors, the advantage there is they're not coming into the school. So there's, from a
Yeah.
safety, some people are more comfortable with that. Other questions?
Hi, I'm Emily Blatter Boyer. I work at the College Board and oversee hiring. And I'm curious if you could talk to us a little bit more about the preparation of tutors. I know you mentioned the value that AI can play in their training. What else have you learned?
So I'm laughing because as you said this, I was flashing back to the folks from Guilford County who said, well, we spent most of our first year feeling like we were an HR department when we were trying to run a tutoring program. It's really hard. And Guilford is a place where they hired all in person. That was a priority for them. Quite a few retired teachers and other folks like that. So the training depends a little bit on if you're building your own program or if you have a vendor. A lot of vendors will have their own training and things like that. We've seen a wide array of this. You need at least some amount of training, 8 to 10 hours. Sometimes it can be more than that. You want some kind of check-in point, especially the virtual tutoring, especially with college students. Most folks, either the vendor or if there's a classroom teacher being paid to oversee, will actually pop in to everyone's session at least once a week because you want that kind of oversight so you can provide ongoing feedback just as you would in any other kind of situation, and then we have kind of the AI piece of it that we're building as we go on this. So the answer is there's some amount of training. A lot of it can be, I don't want to say plug and play because nothing about running programs in schools is ever truly plug and play. But the reality is that if you say to a tutor, here's the curriculum, here are the problems that the kids need to work on this week, work on these problems, then that's what they do. So it depends a little bit on the structure of the program and what you're trying to accomplish.
Great. We have time for a few more questions.
Hello, Catalina Cifuentes from Riverside County Office of Education in California. Just thank you so much for this conversation. My first thought when you were talking about where do they spend that money on, and I'm going to say for us, it was remediation. A lot of remediation, especially at the secondary high school level. So my question is, on any of the schools that you worked with or districts, did they take a look at that reduced remediation, that return on investment with remediation costs could then turn around and help supplement to continue the tutoring process? Because I think what we do is a lot of tutoring, but we don't really measure that impact. And in high school, that's the first thing I went to is, did they see a decrease in remediation and the cost savings there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will say that high school is the hardest for a lot of reasons. And the high impact tutoring programs in high school tend to look pretty different. Algebra 1 is the one where there's like the most consistent approach on this, and we have a lot of evidence about how to do it really well. I've also seen tutoring being used in really interesting ways in high school. So I write about a high school in Baltimore that used tutoring essentially to create almost like a 9th grade boot camp that was really around like mentorship, but also they built in math tutoring because they wanted every 9th grader to participate in it so there wouldn't be any stigma attached. The stigma with tutoring gets more in high school. And so they kind of built in math tutoring along with mentorship and some pieces like that they are, I guess we're kind of waiting to see, but they're hoping that this will kind of pay off and sort of giving kids a better footing. In Texas, in Odessa, while they were doing this big program in K-8, in high school, they were really using tutoring to get kids to pass the state exit exams that they had there, which is not super efficient in that it required a huge amount of oversight and like individual, like I'd have to go find Jeremy and pull him out of whatever, elective he was in so that he could do his tutoring so he could pass the biology exam. But they did get several dozen kids through to graduation with their diploma by doing it in that way. And so I think that piece is too. But I think it's a great question. We don't have an answer, right? This is all still evolving right now. And so that question of like, what could happen? Can we cost out if we saved this money and we got these kids feeling better about where they were? And then we could think differently about how we leverage all those different pieces. And California, by the way, is a great example of also the opportunity with after school, just with the extended learning, the ELOP funding. There's some really cool after school tutoring stuff happening in California with that too.
Yeah, we'd love to work with you to sort of make the business case and what type of research analysis we could do to try to show that return. That'd be great.
Yeah.
My name is Krishna Chetty, Frisco ISD, which is a suburb north of Dallas. I really wanted to say Trent Crim, but I stopped myself. My question was kind of differentiating between this idea of tutoring and test prep. Like you mentioned Texas in particular, STAR testing, that kind of stuff. Like, is there a differentiation? What are they looking at to say? Because if they know they're looking at this particular benchmark, do you find tutors that focus on that benchmark and move away from broader teaching, pedagogy, that kind of stuff?
Sure. I can't explain the offsides rule, but I can try to answer your question, which is to say I think it's really important that this kind of tutoring, high impact, high dosage tutoring, is not homework help, and it's largely not test prep. The Texas example was more of I don't think that counts as high impact tutoring, if I'm being honest. I think that was tutoring to a specific aim that I think is respectable and understandable because we want kids to get their diploma. These are all kids who had already failed the exit. There were 5 exit exams in Texas, as you know, right? So they'd already failed the test that they were getting tutored on, and they were really trying to get them to pass it the second time. So we don't have good numbers on this, but I think that probably 80% at least of the tutoring is K-8. And it's really it's more standards-based tutoring that is supplemental to core instruction, which again is why it's very popular with classroom teachers, than it is about test prep. I think test prep tutoring is a different beast, and it's not typically what the high-impact tutoring programs really focus on.
And I'd just add, coming from the College Board, I think not preparing for a test, but having some way you can measure progress is important to see efficacy, even if it's not a performance-based. Other questions?
Hello, Lee Walden from Delaware Department of Education. A few moments ago, you hit on something that I've seen a lot with students, is the stigma of tutoring.
Mm-hmm.
In your research, have you seen any best practices or features in these districts and schools that make the tutoring environment welcoming, especially if a student is opted in as opposed to electing in?
Absolutely. So in the elementary level, if you use an intervention block kind of schedule, and then everyone is doing some small group intervention, and that does a lot. So when Ector County started their tutoring, they originally were targeting their tier 2 kids for tutoring, and then it was like tier 1 was going to do acceleration, and tier 3 it was like a whole mess. And basically they realized pretty quickly that this was like not going to work on a few levels, and the stigma was part of it. And so they shifted the program to actually put more kids on tutoring with a small group doing a separate kind of acceleration. And the teachers all told me that that really just completely shifted the dynamic. And it became not tutoring as remediation. It became, this is what we all do during this instructional block. And I think that goes a really long way.
Excellent. First of all, I want to thank the audience. Great questions. We were worried about, would you have questions? You have good questions, and you killed it. You may put me out of this side hustle with those kind of questions, but I'd appreciate it. So thank you for your engagement. And then most importantly, thank you, Liz. For those listening, The Future of Tutoring just came out a couple of weeks ago. Get it through any of the channels. It's a great book. It really laid out all the options and all the variables a school leader should think about in tutoring. I think it can have a great impact. I'm inspired. I went into this podcast venture to try to figure out stuff that works. And this is something that really inspired me. So thank you for coming today. Thank you for reading the book. And let's give her a hand. Thanks, everybody. We appreciate it. Thanks for tuning in today. Join the conversation by following The Education Equation wherever you listen to podcasts.